Liz.
Hello. It's been ages.
So Liz, you're going to talk about engineering privacy via offensive technologies.
Yeah. I mean, we hear about all of this data that we're trying to protect and from colonial pipeline to everything, and taking it from the mindset of a victim of, hey, somebody's trying to steal our data, but what if we designed our privacy and data posture from the point of view of an attacker and looking at how they would try to steal it and attacking our own system, seeing what may or may not be out there, and then protecting it from that vantage point.
Okay, that's a lot of talk in 30 minutes. So I know you're going to do it. Hey, before we start, question.
Yes.
Are we going to see your husband walk behind you and greet us today, or maybe not?
You know, this means that you will have to stick around and find out.
Yes.
The only way to know the true answer is
we don't know.
Yeah,
surprises may happen.
I can't predict. Hopefully, he's going to be wearing pants if he does that. But
as a challenge, let's see if he accepts it.
Exactly.
All right, Liz. Stage is yours. Welcome to Tactical Edge. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Let's see if I can figure out, and bear with me on getting my screen shared and starting the fun that we're going to have.
Nice colors, by the way. Beautiful.
Thank you. And so let's see if here we go.
Let's go.
And we're off. So yes, we're going to be talking about engineering privacy via offensive technologies. I'm Liz Wharton, Lawyer Liz on Twitter. I'm Chief of Staff at Scythe. And while Scythe does have an adversary emulation platform, you're going to find that I've picked a couple of different tools and stuff to talk about. We're going to keep it very high level because while I am a lawyer, I am not your lawyer per se. And also it's not as helpful for the lawyers to try to explain some of this, and instead go through, highlight. I have links to some of the tools. I have links to additional resources, but really looking at, as we're trying to look at our systems and our networks and our data, and doing that, keeping in mind that the threats and the TTPs evolve, that the threat actors aren't static, but neither is your data. And the data that is being collected at any given time from your systems, your software, your platform, your customers, it's evolving. But people can't steal, can't leak what they don't have or what you don't have. So the first step is knowing what you have, and then leveraging some of these offensive tools to create better data privacy practices. And so why do you care? Well, one of an SEC press release came out this week. It talked about a settlement from First American Financial Corporation. And it was one of those, well, hey, okay, we're not admitting wrongdoing, but to the tune of $487,000. And in this case, the breach and the data that was found open and online was not because of something they discovered. It was a reporter, Brian Krebs, came and approached them and says, hey, I think I found some data from a supplier that you use, but it's your data, that isn't properly categorized. And as Cheryl just highlighted, suppliers cause a lot of issues. But in this case, we're talking about 800 million. Let's pause. 800 million images dating back to 2003 and had identified all this information. The risk management policies that were in place were called for it to be fixed. It was not fixed. But the bigger question became, did the executive team know about it? Did the engineering team, so that communication issue? So you have all of this breakdown. So it's not that, hey, the data itself that was breached caused issue. It was more the response, the identification. So if you have all of this data that you have been leaking out, in this case for over a decade, well, what can you do? This was data that was meant to be private, that only because of, in a penetration test found it, but could you have found it sooner? And if you had found it sooner, and if you had communicated that, would you have been able to avoid a fine? So when we're talking about privacy and protections and data privacy frameworks, you've got GDPR, you've got in the US, you have different states doing different things. We talk about Latin America, all the different countries are coming up with their own frameworks. So trying to hang your hat on exactly what protections are going to apply, well, they're going to go across the board. And it's an issue we've been struggling with for a while. So when you look at that, the better question is, what data do you hold? Do you have license information? Do you have medical health information? All of these are going to have different requirements, but you may not know exactly what you're holding. So again, focusing less on what you know, but going towards that unknown. But also, what do you hold, and how long are you holding it for? How are you protecting that data? What are you collecting, and how long? And all of these have different frameworks of how long it must be kept. So keeping that in the back of your mind, let's start talking about one of the other trends, which is, I call it, attackers are now saying, okay, hey, we've attacked you. We have leveraged ransomware, whatever. We've taken some of your data. So now you're debating whether you want to pay to get it back. But one of the other risks that you face is, what if they're selling your data to your competitors? What if you're leaking it out? For example, Marketo took the information and went to competitors and said, hey, we have a lot of information on one of your competitors. Wouldn't you find it interesting? So, spoiler alert, the answer is no. You don't want to touch that information. But from the company who's been attacked, you're now facing twice the threat. So, to frame the picture, yeah, we need to protect our data. But again, what if we stop looking at it as, a victim mentality and an after fact? What if we instead we take an ADR posture? So, first of all, what is ADR? Attack, detect, respond. Again, attack, detect, respond. Because early detection and early mitigation is, you will hear the drumbeat of SolarWinds, SolarWinds, SolarWinds. But when you look at the company, the information, the servers, the data that they were protecting, it was available via dark web forums as early as 2019, according to different sources. So what if you were scanning the dark web for your information and you came across it a year before it was announced, or before, if you had that much time to get a start on it, there you go. That is how you can start getting ahead. So one of the things that Scythe we start talking about is the adversary emulation. So with attack, detect, respond tools, you're not looking at that static. You're enabling your SOC to emulate and constantly move, because again, you don't know, they can't steal what you don't have, but what you have is changing. And as well as the attack and how the attackers are leveraging it. So typical BAS tools will have a snapshot in time, a penetration test. But again, your data is not static. It's continually. So finding tools that are doing that continuous automated testing helps you keep up with the evolution. So, okay, now we know why. Why is this important? Why is this mindset of what if we're constantly using tools to attack our own and try to find our own data and see where our vulnerabilities are? So, first of all, what do we do with this? What is an adversary emulation? And what is the point of the attack? Well, we're trying to identify what we're collecting, same as an attacker would. They start using these tools. They want to see, hey, what data do they have? Where are we retaining it? And what are we retaining? So, for example, one of the most common vulnerabilities is open S3 buckets. So, something misconfigured. Well, all right, what are we collecting? Take a sandbox environment, run an application, isolated environment, and see what our programs are talking back and forth to. And one of the biggest things I have, especially being from the law department, if I come and ask the engineering team, hey, I've had a question. I need to know, what are we doing? Do we collect this kind of information? I need to update something on our platform. Hey, are we tracking this? And inevitably, if you go through, and as you've probably done, as you go through different checklists internally, you're like, yep, nope, nope, nope. But is that really the case? Because again, you can't defend what you don't know that you're leaking, and you can't come up with mitigations. But use the MITRE attack framework as a checklist. Use it as, all right, because attacker's not going to call up and say, hey, are you using this? And engineering team responding, no, we're not, we're good. No, they're going to throw stuff at it and they're going to see what comes back. So taking that, using the MITRE attack as a roadmap and a framework. So I've got, again, all the links, because one of the latest tools that was released yesterday was Defend, where MITRE has partnered with the NSA and provided research where they map the attack and they defend models to each other. So you have the countermeasure component. So again, using what the attackers are doing, using those tools, various tools all map to the MITRE attack. For example, Scythe's platform, we map a lot of our stuff to the MITRE attack framework. Well, now using those others through the Defend, you can come up with some of those countermeasures that we'll talk about later as well. So one of the things you want to do is, again, identify where old or legacy, aka forgotten infrastructure is. Why would you want to do that? Because you've done your checklist, you've done your pen test, Colonial Pipeline. The attack point and where the threat actors were able to get in was a VPN server that wasn't utilizing the multi-factor authentication that they required for everything else. So using a tool like Zeta Analytics, and again, I've got links to all of these, but when you start searching to see knowing what your attack surface is and what are some of the legacy systems, what are some things that you've forgotten about? Perhaps someone set up an architecture and has since left the company, or the documentation is stale. These are some of the ways, again, using Zetalytics. Another thing to issue or look at is highlighted for the surprises. A lot of mobile applications, for example, were built using the Facebook SDK. Why? Because it worked. It was easy. You're trying to cut costs. You're trying to, again, what works. So they use the Facebook SDK as the basis of their applications. Well, what happens when you don't realize that Facebook wants that data? It is a data-rich environment that your app may have. So it's something that you weren't expecting to be collecting, but because that was the basis and the framework for where you built your system, when you turn off that data and say, no, somebody doesn't need to get that data, or you don't realize when Facebook says, hey, we're getting cut off. So one of the things that happened is through an update, it then bricked and caused all kinds of crashing. But a lot of the companies and a lot of other companies, it's not just the Spotify, the Pinterest, the Tinder, that are using it. There are a lot of companies that are doing that. Do you know if you're doing that? So by using an attack and identifying that, it enables you to see, didn't know we were leaking that. Another issue again is S3 buckets. This one was just another, but it's a very common. You've misconfigured an S3 bucket, or perhaps you've left your API keys out. So again, scanning. And in this case, GitHub has, and I've linked to a couple of articles and a couple of different tools, but using secret scanning, seeing what information are you accidentally leaking, but attacking it not from the perspective of, I know where to look, I'm running a pen test, but under the assumption that it's all leaking and it's all like, what may I find? So you're attacking again your S3 buckets, your API keys, just to see what's there. So once you've done some of these basic tests, because the basic attacking of the GitHub for your API keys that maybe you've left in there, for your S3 buckets, for going and looking at and scanning what legacy architecture, you've now started identifying, as the attackers would, this information. And you've identified some areas of data that you didn't realize was leaking. Okay, now identify, is it critical? Is the method it's leaking critical? Is the data itself critical? Was it a surprise? And the correlation. So just because the data in absence or a standalone, but is not triggering any perhaps privacy concerns, are you leaking enough data in enough different places that with some simple tools, people can start bringing that together so that it then triggers something? So once you've done gray hat warfare is another tool. So it's helping you identify, again, those critical data, that critical key. So it's another way of scanning and identifying what is out there publicly. But from the mindset of, you don't know, don't put those parameters on your research. Just assume, as the attackers, let's just see what we have out there. And so running those tools, once you've identified some of the information, using open source other tools, for example, like Maltego, and running in and seeing through the data mapping as an attacker would. Attackers take that information, then run it through and say, okay, we have these independent bits and keys of data. What can we put together and create a bigger picture? And the other thing is the correlation. What can we, now that we've identified all these different pieces of information, and in this case, we look at, for example, airlines. This was the breach response email that came out to a press inquiry from India Air. And so you think, oh, it's an airline. How much information do they have? Well, if you look at all this different, and perhaps some of it was encrypted, perhaps some of it was properly segregated, but the attackers in this case were able to pull, and let's pause for effect, all of the information: your name, address, nationality, passport information, your travel dates, the city codes, where you're going to. So some of this in, again, standalone, all right, it's not as bad. But if we're building our privacy systems, this lets us know, hey, this is where attackers could get. It allows us to, again, design better because we know what is out there and what people are able to get. So keeping that in mind and keeping that framework, but running the test yourselves, because again, going through a checklist isn't going to tell you that. It's using tools like Maltego and using it from the attacker's vantage point and from their perspective, that red team offensive, let's bring all this together. That's when we can start building out the correlation. And that enables, once you've identified some of the easy low-hanging fruit, through the attack, your S3 buckets, your GitHub, what is out there? What are, how was your mobile app built? Now that you've identified some of the information and been able to identify how critical it is, that enables you and empowers you to then come into the third prong of the adversary emulation of the ADR, the attack, detect, and now respond. So you've identified the data that you've got that you didn't realize. One question to ask is, do you still need that data? Is it tied to an old version? Is it tied to an old goal? Is it tied to an old need? One of the things when I was working as the attorney for an airport, we realized we were collecting a lot of parking information, of knowing what vehicles, the credit card, the payment, when those vehicles came in and stuff. Well, we didn't need to keep it as long as we did, because we already had the data points from it. We'd already been able to do the analysis and build out our models to say, oh, we see the traffic pattern trends and stuff. We didn't need it anymore. So we're able to reevaluate and shift our framework. Also, what can you better protect? So let's say that you've identified different, you've got your information your S3, your AWS buckets. Well, all right, what information is there? Do we need to put in the authentication tokens? Do we have encryption passwords? Because we've identified, all right, not all this information, but hey, when put together with this other information, that's important. And it also helps you decide and delineate where they're tiered roles. Who needs access to that? Does the person whose authentication tokens work for one, do they need to have access to something else, or do we need to set up a different system? But also with your API keys, what you've now been able to identify, some of that was out there. Well, now that we've analyzed it from an attacker standpoint, are we taking steps? Are we building out and, for example, blocking that get URL in cases where we don't need it so that it's not an open bucket? And again, looking back at the different types of data, now that you've seen what you have and you have a better picture because you've attacked yourself and you're doing it. Because again, your data is changing, your goals are changing, and setting up almost an automated review schedule that says, hey, under GDPR, we don't need to collect this data anymore. We don't need it. Let's get rid of it. But again, much like the adversaries are coming, those goals may change. By cutting down on and setting up, again, those adversary emulations that, unlike the past, that are constantly running, that you're constantly doing those, it helps you and enables you to also, and this is a key word when it comes to budget time, it cuts down on your storage and your processing costs. If you've been able to identify, hey, we're still collecting this information, it's timed out. We don't need to keep it. It was only subject to a 7-year review, or we no longer need that raw data. Then that's enabling you to also create other efficiencies through that adversary mindset. And again, the whole goal and what you're doing with some of these tools is you're going back to the reminder that the attackers, their TTPs, all of this is evolving constantly. So by creating that attack, detect, respond mindset, you're evolving. because your data is evolving. You're seeing under the latest TTPs that you've mapped to MITR, that as you're seeing those trends, are you running those against your system? Because again, your data is evolving, but they can't steal what you don't have. So if you're updating your priorities based on what you have, what you realize you don't need, what you didn't realize you were leaking, you do that by knowing what you have. And again, you know what you have because you've run those adversary emulations, but you're also leveraging those offensive tools. Don't let the attackers have all the fun for the data privacy. So again, I've gone through and I've highlighted and I've sped through a bunch of these different resources. One thing to first do, and of course, plug for Scythe, is we have a paper on attack, detect, and respond. And it goes into much deeper. It links to several other tools that you can use that aren't just Scythe and Scythe's platform. But I've linked as well to the MITRE Defend matrix, which will come in handy for those who are looking for, once you've identified where your vulnerabilities are, it builds that out. I've also linked to some of the GitHub, the Geekflare article that I talk about goes through a whole list of different ways that you can attack. But again, keeping in mind, you don't have to, and it's that change of mindset, change of mind frame that's going to allow you to engineer for better privacy because you know what you have, you know the better state of affairs, but it's using those offensive technologies. So with that, hopefully, Ed, I didn't go through too much. David, what y'all did not see was on the other side of my camera, I was being entertained by David. And if I didn't think it would have interrupted the flow too much, I would have absolutely taken a picture because I think there was some like walk like an Egyptian.
Oh, nice.
Moves. I don't know.
All right. Well,
yeah.
Well, we didn't see it, so it didn't happen. Just like your conversation said, you know. And there he goes.
And he's wearing pants. I will say he is wearing pants.
We've spotted a unicorn. That's what your Scythe people said. Hey, this was interesting. In fact, we're going to be having a conversation next week on our CISO LATAM on Wednesdays, and we're going to talk about the MITRE Defend. It's that, I mean, that looks like it's going to be something pretty cool, right? I mean, if you use it properly, it's going to be amazing.
And it's really just empowering you. And the fact that it's tied into, because when you look at the attack framework, you're thinking, geez, but no, this is giving you actionable items, not only to defend, but also think about how you're storing your own, data, information.
Yeah. Hey, so I know the Maltego has a cost to it, but there's also a free to use, right? Scythe also has your own platform. And is there a cost to use this Scythe platform, or is there also a free to use at a certain level?
Well, there is a cost, but what the goal for all of these, and so I tried to highlight different ones in our attack, our ADR white paper. We also do have, which is free on the Scythe website, we do have emulations on the Scythe website, as well as in our GitHub repository that are free. And we do those walkthroughs. Take advantage of those.
Yes.
See how the attackers are getting in. And that will give you, of course, the tools, the scanning tools are really what come in handy because that is how they're getting their information. But again, why let them have all the fun?
So what you're saying right now is let's switch from that defend mindset because we know our network and we know how to defend it, to switch it to an offensive mindset so that we can defend it better.
Well, an offensive mindset, but not to just protect our network, but instead protect our data. Okay. And specifically, how can we build better data practices or privacy based on what an attacker would do? So if we attacked, what were we able to get? Yeah. And if we got it, I mean, again, Colonial Pipeline, SolarWinds, that data was out there. And those red flags were popping up if you had been looking on the dark web forums for over a year. So if we can give ourselves a head start because we took an offensive mindset rather than just, oh, well, no, engineering told me this was okay. Or, oh, I forgot about that. If we
Right.
can save both money, time, and also build better now, it's win-win all around for a company.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Liz, as always, thank you so much for being here. Really, really appreciate it. I see that Tyrone is back. Look at him. He's eager to go talk IPv6. Oh, my goodness. So, Liz, thank you so much.
No,
Really
thank you.
appreciate your time here.
No, I
Thanks.
appreciate everyone else.